Once upon a time, there was a tiny island. No oil, no gold, no natural resources, just heat, humidity, and a deep natural harbor. The world didn't notice it. Big powers ruled over it. At times, it was just a dot on a map, a place where fishermen lived, where pirates sailed, and where people struggled to survive. But this island had something stronger than oil or gold. It had belief. It had vision. And it had one man who refused to give up. Singapore was born in pain. It was colonized. It was occupied. It was broken. And when it finally became independent in 1965, the world said, it won't survive. No army, no fresh water, no land, no money, no allies, just problems. But where others saw limits, Singapore saw opportunity. Where others gave advice, Singapore took action. It didn't beg. It built. It didn't wait. It worked. From a poor island to one of the richest cities in the world. From a vulnerable port to a global hub of finance, trade, innovation, and education. Today, Singapore is a model of order, discipline, intelligence, and vision. A place where the impossible was made real, not by luck, but by leadership. In this video, you will hear the full story. How Singapore rose from nothing, how it transformed itself, and most importantly, how you can improve your English while listening. So, sit back and listen closely, because what you're about to learn will not only surprise you, but also inspire you to believe in the power of vision and hard work. Let's begin the journey. Part 1, From Swamp to Strategy, the beginning of Singapore. Singapore is a name that today means success, speed, and strength. But not long ago, it was something else. A small island. Humid, covered in thick jungle and buzzing with mosquitoes. It had no oil, no gold, not even fresh water. Just a muddy fishing village with a few wooden boats and simple homes. Nobody thought this place could ever rise. And yet, something happened. Something that would change not just this island, but the world's view of what is possible. Let's go back to the beginning. In the early 1800s, the British Empire was growing. Britain controlled India, and it wanted to expand its power in Southeast Asia. The British needed a safe port where ships could rest, trade, and refuel while sailing between India and China. That's when a man named Sir Stamford Raffles arrived. In 1819, he signed a deal with the local rulers and created a British port on this small island. At that time, Singapore had only a few people and no real development. But Raffles saw something in the land that others didn't. Location. Singapore sat right on the world's busiest sea route. It was in the perfect place for global trade. Soon, the port became active. Traders came from China, India, Malaysia, and beyond. Goods flowed in and out, silk, spices, rubber, tin. People began to settle here in large numbers. Singapore became a mix of cultures, languages, and dreams. It was loud, dirty, crowded, but full of life. By the early 1900s, it was one of the busiest ports in Asia. Then came the darkness. In 1942, during World War II, the Japanese army attacked. Singapore was called a fortress. The British believed it could never fall. But it did. In just 1 week, the Japanese took control and ruled with fear. Food became scarce. People were arrested. Many were killed. For 3 years, the island lived in silence and pain. When the war ended in 1945, the British returned. But something had changed. The people of Singapore had suffered, and now they wanted freedom. In 1959, After years of protests and political struggle, Singapore was given self-rule. A young man named Lee Kuan Yew became the first prime minister. He was not like other leaders. He was sharp, disciplined, and had a clear vision. He wanted Singapore to become a modern, clean, and successful nation. But there were many problems. The economy was weak. There were no natural resources. The people were poor. And worse, racial tensions were rising. In 1963, Singapore joined Malaysia. The plan was to share resources, grow together, and become stronger. But the plan failed. Disagreements over race, economy, and politics grew quickly. Riots broke out in the streets. In 1965, something shocking happened. Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia. It did not leave by choice, it was forced out. Suddenly, Singapore was an independent country. Alone, small, weak, surrounded by bigger, richer neighbors. Many thought it would not survive. Even Lee Kuan Yew cried on national television. But behind those tears was steel. He stood up, wiped his eyes, and went to work. The new Singapore had nothing. It even had to buy water from Malaysia. But Lee Kuan Yew and his team had a plan. They started with the basics. First, housing. Most people lived in slums. So the government built strong, clean flats for the people. Second, education. They built schools, trained teachers, and made English the working language, so Singaporeans could trade with the world. Third, jobs. They invited foreign companies to invest. They offered low taxes and strong protection. They promised no corruption, and they kept that promise. The factories began to rise. People got jobs in electronics, shipbuilding, and textiles. The port grew even more. Containers full of goods moved day and night. Singapore was working fast, smart, and clean. At the same time, the government created strong laws. No littering, no corruption, no crime. Some of these rules seemed strange to outsiders, like the ban on chewing gum. But the rules had a purpose. They created order, trust, and peace. Step by step, Singapore began to shine. Roads were smooth. Streets were clean. Hospitals were world-class. People felt safe. Investors came from all over the world. Japan, Germany, America. They brought money, machines, and knowledge. Singapore learned fast. But Lee Kuan Yew was not only thinking about today. He was thinking about 10, 20, 30 years into the future. He believed in planning, in long-term thinking, and most of all, he believed in discipline, not just in leaders, but in the people. He once said, "We must be better than others, not because we want to show off, but because we have no other choice." And the people followed. They worked hard. They believed. They pushed forward. By the late 1970s, Singapore was no longer a poor island. It had become a modern city. Its buildings were rising. Its economy was growing. Its people were proud. Still, this was only the beginning. Singapore had found its feet. But now, it had to stand tall in a world that was changing fast. The next test was coming. Would Singapore be ready? The story continues. Part 2, Building a Nation That Doesn't Break. Singapore was now officially a country, but it didn't feel like one. No army, no resources, no water of its own, surrounded by neighbors that didn't fully trust it. There was fear in the air, but also something else, a powerful desire to prove everyone wrong. Lee Kuan Yew and his team had no time to waste. They understood one truth. If Singapore failed now, it would never rise again. So, they started to build things from scratch. Firstly, security. Singapore had no military when it became independent in 1965. None, not even one tank. With the help of Israel, they trained young men. They created national service. All male citizens had to join the army for 2 years. It wasn't just about defense. It was about building discipline, loyalty, and unity. Next came housing. People were living in crowded wooden homes, some without toilets or clean water. Fires would often destroy entire neighborhoods. The government stepped in. They created the Housing Development Board, the HDB. It built strong, clean, and affordable apartments for everyone. By the 1970s, more than half of the population had moved into modern homes. The number would only grow. But a safe home was just the start. People needed jobs, and Singapore needed money. The government created something bold, the Economic Development Board, EDB. Its job was simple, bring in foreign companies. And it worked. Lee's team offered them peace, cheap labor, low taxes, and zero corruption. The message was clear: come build your factories here. We'll protect your money. We'll give you workers. And we won't interfere. Big names came in from Japan, the United States, Europe. They built factories in electronics, shipbuilding, oil refining, and textiles. Singaporeans, hungry for work, trained quickly. They worked hard. They built a reputation for being fast, honest, and careful. The world took notice. Meanwhile, the government focused on one of the most important weapons of all, education. They built schools everywhere. English became the language of education and business. Why English? Because it connected Singapore to the world. It united different ethnic groups, and it gave young people access to knowledge beyond their island. The school system was strict. Students were pushed to be excellent. Teachers were trained well. Exams were tough. But it worked. By the late 1970s, Singapore had changed. The streets were clean. Jobs were increasing. Crime was low. And corruption? Almost zero. Ministers who were caught stealing were punished harshly, no matter how high their position. That's how trust was built. Singaporeans began to believe in something new, their country. But Lee Kuan Yew was not satisfied. He was always planning 10 steps ahead. He asked a powerful question: what happens when we're no longer cheap labor? Factories were good for now, but the future was knowledge, not just machines. So, the next plan began, turning Singapore into a hub for high-tech industries, finance, and services. The government invested in science parks, in universities, in research centers. Singapore's polytechnics trained young engineers, lab technicians, and IT workers. Slowly, the economy moved up the value chain. At the same time, Singapore's banks grew. The country became a global financial center with strong laws, trust, and transparency. Rich people and companies around the world started keeping money in Singapore. Why? Because they knew it was safe. Tourism also took off. The island became famous for its safety, order, and beauty. People came to shop, eat, and see a clean Asian city that worked like a Swiss watch. Hotels grew. Airlines expanded. And Singapore Airlines became one of the world's best, known for its service and class. But behind all this success was something quiet and powerful: planning. The government didn't wait for problems. It prepared for them in advance. Traffic jams? They created the ERP system to charge cars during peak hours. Not enough land. They started reclaiming land from the sea. Limited water? They invested in water recycling and desalination plants. Today, Singapore is almost water independent. The country became a case study. Students, ministers, and business leaders from around the world came to learn how this small island did it. And still, there were challenges. Ethnic harmony was always a concern. Singapore was, and still is, made of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and other communities. In the early days, there were riots and tensions, but the government acted fast. They created racial harmony laws. Schools celebrated Racial Harmony Day. Public housing was mixed to avoid ethnic ghettos. The message was simple. We are all Singaporeans first. Freedom of speech? That was another issue. Singapore never became a loud democracy. The press was controlled. Protests were rare. The government said it was necessary to keep peace. Critics called it too strict. But most Singaporeans accepted the trade-off: freedom for order, safety, and success. By the 1980s, Singapore had transformed. From muddy kampongs to steel skyscrapers. From fishing boats to cargo ships. From street food stalls to Michelin star restaurants. The country had done the impossible. Lee Kuan Yew had taken a city with nothing and turned it into a nation with everything. But he always reminded people, this success is not natural, is not automatic. We can lose it in one generation if we are not careful. And with that warning, he prepared to step down. The next chapter of Singapore's story would be about what happens when a founder leaves. Part 3, After the Founder, Keeping the Dream Alive. By the end of the 1980s, Singapore had already done what few thought was possible. It had become a clean, rich, and safe country. But the man behind this miracle, Lee Kuan Yew, was not going to lead forever. In 1990, after more than 30 years in power, Lee stepped down as prime minister. It was a big moment. People wondered, what would happen now? Could anyone else lead like him? Could the success continue without the man who built it? But Lee was not the kind of leader to leave things to chance. He had already chosen a successor, Goh Chok Tong. Goh was different, softer in style, more open in speech, but still serious about results. Lee stayed behind the scenes, watching, advising, making sure the system didn't break. It wasn't about one man. It was about making sure Singapore worked with or without him. Under Goh Chok Tong, Singapore kept growing. The economy opened up more. Technology became more important. The internet arrived. New industries like biotechnology and financial services started booming. Shopping malls got bigger. More people traveled overseas. Singaporeans were becoming global citizens. But with growth came pressure. Young people wanted more freedom. They wanted to speak out, be creative, question authority. The world was changing, and Singapore had to change too. So, the government began to open up slowly. Not too fast, not too wild, but just enough to give people more space. New policies allowed more art, more public debate, and even some controlled political competition. Yet, the core stayed strong: discipline, safety, and trust. Then came a big test. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis hit. Currencies collapsed. Businesses closed. People lost jobs across the region. But in Singapore, things held together. The government used its savings to protect jobs and support companies. It worked. While others were falling, Singapore stood firm. A few years later, another disaster struck: SARS. A deadly virus spread quickly. Fear took over. People stopped going out. Schools and airports closed. Singapore had never faced anything like it. But once again, the government acted fast. Hospitals were prepared. Contact tracing was done by hand. Rules were strict, and soon the virus was under control. The world praised Singapore's speed and discipline. By 2004, another change came. Lee Hsien Loong, the eldest son of Lee Kuan Yew, became the next prime minister. Many worried, was this a family business now? But Lee Hsien Loong had earned his place. He was a top student and a long-time minister. He had vision and skill, and he had new challenges. The world was moving fast. China was rising. Technology was everywhere. Social media was giving people a new voice. Climate change was a threat, and inequality was growing. Rich Singaporeans were getting richer. But what about the poor and middle class? The government responded. It improved welfare, gave more help to low-income families, made healthcare more affordable. It started talking more about mental health, work-life balance, and quality of life, not just GDP. One of the biggest moves was building up Singapore's global brand. Changi Airport became one of the world's best. Gardens by the Bay turned the city into a green wonderland. The Marina Bay Sands, with its ship-shaped rooftop, became a global icon. Formula One night races, international summits, art festivals, all put Singapore on the world map. Tourism exploded. Business boomed. Singapore had become not just rich, but cool. And yet, danger was always near. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Markets crashed. Big banks failed. But again, Singapore was ready. Years of saving money and careful planning helped to bounce back quickly. The same old formula worked. Stay calm, act fast, protect the people. Still, the country faced criticism too. Some said it was too expensive to live in Singapore. Housing prices were rising. Stress levels were high. Young people felt tired, always chasing grades, jobs, success. Others felt the political system was too strict. Elections were held, but the ruling party kept winning, again and again. But even critics admitted one thing. Singapore delivered. Trains ran on time. Crime was low. Corruption was rare. If you worked hard, you could succeed. The streets were clean. The lights never went out. And the people, though sometimes quiet, were proud. A deeper change was also happening. Singaporeans were starting to ask new questions. What is success? Is it just money and buildings? Or is it also happiness, family, nature, creativity? The government began shifting its tone. It spoke about smart nation, using technology to improve lives. It promoted green living, building cycling paths and planting more trees. It introduced more arts and culture into schools. And most of all, it started listening more. Lee Kuan Yew passed away in 2015. The nation cried. Thousands lined the streets in the rain to say goodbye. It wasn't just the death of a man. It felt like the end of a chapter. But Singapore didn't stop. It had become a system, not just a personality. A machine that kept running because it was built to last. And as the world looked on, one question remained. Could this small island keep growing in a future full of unknowns? A future with global competition, digital revolutions, and rising political noise. Part 4. Facing the Future. Singapore in a Changing World. Singapore had come a long way. From a tiny island with nothing, it had built itself into a global success. But the world was changing faster than ever before. New challenges were coming from every direction: technology, politics, environment, and society. How would Singapore survive in this new era? One of the biggest changes was technology. The digital revolution was reshaping everything. Smartphones, social media, artificial intelligence, and big data were creating new opportunities but also new risks. Singapore knew it had to keep up or fall behind. So, the government launched this Smart Nation initiative. The goal? To use technology to improve daily life for everyone. Sensors were placed across the city to monitor traffic, weather, and pollution. Public transport became more efficient with real-time apps. Health services used technology to help patients remotely. Even trash bins could tell when they were full. The city was becoming a giant network of connected devices, a smart city. But it wasn't just about gadgets. It was about people too. Singapore invested heavily in education, teaching coding and digital skills from a young age. It created programs to help workers learn new skills, preparing them for jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago. Lifelong learning became a national priority. Still, technology brought worries. Privacy became a concern. Could the government control too much information? What about security risks like hacking? Singapore had to balance safety with freedom carefully. Another big challenge was the environment. Singapore is a small island. Rising sea levels and climate change could threaten its very existence. The government didn't ignore this danger. It started investing in green technology, building seawalls, and improving water management. The famous Gardens by the Bay was more than just beautiful. It showed Singapore's commitment to a greener future. Singapore also aimed to be a leader in sustainability. It promoted clean energy, recycled water, and energy-efficient buildings. The goal was clear: survive and thrive in a changing climate. On the social front, Singapore was evolving. The population was aging. Birth rates were low. The government encouraged families to have more children through financial incentives and support programs. At the same time, Singapore welcomed skilled immigrants to keep the workforce strong. But immigration was sensitive. Singaporeans worried about losing their identity and culture. The government worked hard to maintain harmony among different ethnic groups, promoting multiculturalism and respect. It was a delicate balance, embracing diversity while preserving unity. Political life also continued to change. Though the ruling party remained dominant, younger Singaporeans became more interested in politics. Social media gave people a louder voice. The government started allowing more public debates and new political parties, but with rules to keep order. Leaders knew they had to listen more, adapt faster, and be open to new ideas, without losing the discipline that made Singapore successful. Economically, Singapore kept diversifying. It moved beyond manufacturing to focus on finance, biotech, and digital services. The port remained a vital hub, but innovation labs and startups were growing quickly. Singapore aimed to be a global center for technology and research. The city also pushed for stronger ties with other countries. It signed many trade agreements, built partnerships, and hosted important summits. In a world of uncertainty, Singapore wanted to stay connected and relevant. But challenges remained. Economic inequality was rising. Housing costs and living expenses were high. Stress and mental health issues increased. Singapore faced questions about what kind of society it wanted to be. The government began focusing on quality of life, not just wealth. It invested in parks, sports facilities, and the arts. It promoted mental health awareness. It encouraged work-life balance. It wanted Singaporeans to feel happy and secure. And Singaporeans themselves grew more confident. They traveled more, studied abroad, brought back new ideas. Many became entrepreneurs, artists, and activists. The city-state was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place to dream and create. Through all these changes, one thing stayed the same: Singapore's spirit. Discipline, hard work, planning, and unity remained the foundation. The island was small, but its vision was huge. Singapore faced the future not with fear, but with determination. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about leadership in a new world. And that journey continues. You've now heard the full story of Singapore, a tiny island with no natural resources, no oil, no fresh water, and surrounded by bigger, stronger neighbors. A place that many believed would never survive on its own. Just land filled with mud, mosquitoes, and fishermen. But Singapore had something more powerful than oil or gold: a vision, a plan, and the courage to act on it. Singapore is more than just a city-state. It's a lesson for the world, proof that where you start does not decide where you end up. While many waited for luck or outside help, Singapore chose to build its own future. They didn't say, "Let's wait and see." They said, "We will make it happen." There are deep lessons in Singapore's journey, lessons you can take into your own life. First, your beginning doesn't define your future. Singapore started with almost nothing. No oil wells, no big factories, no natural wealth. Just a group of determined people led by Lee Kuan Yew, who believed that a small island could become great. Like Singapore, you can start small but dream big. Second, invest in people, not just places. Singapore focused on education, health, and housing. They built schools and trained teachers. They made sure every citizen had a chance to succeed. Real success happens when you lift up the people, not just the buildings. Third, prepare before the opportunity arrives. Singapore didn't wait for luck or resources. They built ports, roads, and industries even before they had many jobs or factories. They got ready for the future, knowing that opportunity favors the prepared. This is something we can all remember. Be ready for your chance, even if it feels far away. Fourth, create your own rules. Singapore did not copy others blindly. They created their own style of leadership, strict laws, and strong work ethics. Some outsiders mocked their rules: no chewing gum, heavy fines for littering. But these rules built order, trust, and safety. You don't have to follow the crowd to succeed. Sometimes you need to be different. Fifth, think long-term, 50 years and beyond. While others plan for the next day or year, Singapore planned for decades ahead. They built universities, research centers, and embraced technology early on. They knew today's small steps create tomorrow's giant leaps. Sixth, when crisis comes, adapt and rise stronger. Singapore faced wars, expulsion from Malaysia, economic recessions, and global crises. Each time, they didn't break. They changed and came back more powerful. You will face your own storms, but like Singapore, you can grow through them. Seventh, respect and value every person. From leaders to workers, Singapore's success is a team effort. Every person matters. The city's strength comes from its unity and shared goals. Singapore's story is not just history. It is a living example of courage, discipline, and belief. Your dream may seem impossible today. The road may look long and difficult. But if you build it step by step, day by day, one day the world will stop and take notice of your success. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep learning, keep growing, and one story at a time.